you need to, you really need to be an expert in your category.
Sure.
So if you want to do something like you guys sell water lily pops and things like that, if you want to do something like that, understand the category context in your local culture where you're selling first, right? Now, if that's India, that's going to be a very different context than salty snacks in a US retail environment.
Sure.
So given that I know a lot of your listeners are exporting, and riding the healthy snack trend globally, healthy food trend, if you want to get into that market, you've really got to do your homework in whatever target country. That's my other lesson to the US is that if you're going into retail, in the US, you actually probably have fewer brands at the Indian retail stores in any given category. Seriously, even in snack food, there's probably fewer brands on the shelf. And for every category of Indian snack food. So, and I've been in these stores, so I sort of have seen this pattern, right? So you're not going to find like in South India, they eat murukku, and there's not going to be 20 brands of that. There's not going to be 20 brands of that at an Indian retail store in the United States.
Hi everyone, good morning. Welcome to the new episode of Live Sattviko Talks. Today we have with us Dr. James Richardson from the United States. Hi doctor, good morning.
Hi Dawal, hi everybody. Nice to be here.
Same here. How are you?
I am good, healthy and happy.
All well, all well. How is everyone at home?
We are good. Kids are back in school, so that's always good.
Awesome. That's great to know. First, we have Dr. James with us from the US, who is a cultural anthropologist, a strategy consultant, a podcaster as well, and a consumer packaged goods expert. He's an expert in consumer sector in the FMCG. He is also the founder of Premium Growth Solutions, which is into strategic consultancy of early stage CPG brands. He is also the author of Ramping Your Brand, How to Write the Killer CPG Growth Curve book, which is also a #1 bestseller on Amazon. So, Dr. James, it is awesome to have you on this session. I'll quickly go with my first question now. So, I know about you and understood that you have spent a lot of time at the ground across whole food market stores and other stores as well. So, if you share a couple of your experiences with our viewers.
With Whole Foods market or just with American retail?
Whatever works best for you.
Okay. So I have, it's funny, my career in business actually began doing work for Whole Foods management team in 2003 to about 2005 in the company that I used to work at. And we did a lot of research on their shoppers way back then when I had less gray hair. But Whole Foods is interesting because it's, in the American retail context, it was very unique in creating large retail perimeters inside a grocery store full of fresh food. I think this is something that was very unique in the US because the US at the time was, and we still are, mainly a packaged food and cardboard and box and plastic beverage culture. Unlike India, which I've lived in. Now, I know India's gotten more into packaged food and beverage, but it's still nowhere near the level that you see in the United States. So part is that we hate to cook, and so Whole Foods was part of a foodie renaissance, and it had a lot to do with what brought a fairly large group of affluent shoppers into that chain over the last 20-25 years. And obviously health has something to do with it. But that's sort of their core shopper, who's the real health focused person. They have a larger group of shoppers who just come in for really great tasting produce and wine and cheese and party food. Right, because when Americans host parties, Dewal, we actually don't do the cooking.
Right. Of course.
And we're not embarrassed to admit it.
Oh, absolutely.
Which is so people will, I remember when Whole Foods was really starting to pick up, when they had because when I started working with them, they had about 100 stores in the US. People were starting to use them as like party food when they had guests over, right? They would go and get a whole bunch of stuff, and then they would cut the cooking labor down to near nothing. So I thought your Indian audience would appreciate the absurdity of that. So yeah, we're not very good hosts.
That's completely okay. I mean, it is about that hospitality and not only food, right?
See, we're more concerned about the quality be good, and since we don't know how to cook,
right?
It's just
absolutely awesome. So, of course, I mean, I understand that you work with a lot of emerging CPG brands, and of course, a growing brand always on the lookout to understand the consumer buying patterns and the growth strategies. So, on that, what tips would you like to give to the entrepreneurs who are now starting up or who own these emerging brands?
Yeah, I think one thing is you really need to be an expert in your category.
Sure.
So if you want to do something like you guys sell water lily pops and things like that, if you want to do something like that, understand the category context in your local culture where you're selling first, right? Now, if that's India, that's going to be a very different context than salty snacks in a US retail environment.
Sure.
So given that I know a lot of your listeners are exporting, and riding the healthy snack trend globally, healthy food trend. If you want to get into that market, you've really got to do your homework in whatever target country you pick. So if that's the US,
right,
I would tell people you really need to understand, and with the beauty of the internet is that you could either find you could literally find a graduate student for free, probably a relative, and just beg them to go to like 25 stores and take pictures of the shelves.
Sure.
Right. So that you now at least have an understanding of the different kinds of products for sale rather than making a whole bunch of assumptions. What I've noticed a lot of people continue to do when they're exporting is they let the importer, agency, or a broker write the strategy for them. Right. And so it becomes this weird B2B business. But the folks that do well growing a business to scale, to like $100 million US and beyond, which is where you finally have an impact on the industry.
Yes.
Because we're a big country with a big packaged food market. If you want to have that kind of impact, you've got to build the business with superb design. I talk about in the book, ramping your brand, building something that is modernizing your category in that local cultural context. So in other words, you may have you may have invented a snack food in India that maybe works in the Indian market. You may have to completely redo the packaging, the messaging, everything to work in the US.
Right.
I'll close by saying that the one thing I see exporting companies do is they tend to it's very easy to find yourself selling primarily like an Asian food retail markets or literally an Indian food retail markets. And now that there's enough of a system now in the US that you could sell a couple pallets worth of your product and just be an Indian retail store.
Right.
It's not that hard anymore. There's a big enough audience in the US of expats. So it's a big expat audience. But if you want to, the problem is that that's the easiest sale to get. Like that's the no-brainer sale. Yes. If you're sitting in Bombay or somewhere.
Yeah.
So the problem is low. And so say it works. No, seriously, say it works. Say you have a really good product and expat NRIs really like it. That's great. Yes. What if it grows? It will lull you into a trap. And that trap is that you haven't spent any time figuring out the non-NRI audience in the US, which is 98% of it. Yes. How you're going to attract them to this thing, because you're going to need them to get to scale.
Absolutely.
And you're absolutely going to need them. So what happens is I notice a lot of people, they wind up in an ethnic retail trap.
Yes.
The brands that are doing really well, that have an ethnic origin to the food or specific cultural origin to the food, they actually go to market. They go to market like Frito-Lay in the US. In other words, they make up a brand name. Now, whether it's from Hindi or Marathi, that doesn't really matter to most of us here because it's going to be made up to us, right? So there's a very successful snack food brand that's doing this, and it's called Bhuja.
Okay.
Bhuga. Now, I know Tamil, I don't know Hindi, so I have no idea what that means. But anyways, that's their name. And to the American audience, it's just two random syllables. And so that's actually good because now they can focus on the food and not what the brand means.
Yes.
So
that's a great point.
But the packaging itself is just, this is really great snack food. It's not talking to NRIs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the seasonings and the marketing and the positioning that they're doing, Whole Foods was a big early customer for them. That gets you in front of a lot of affluent white people who look like me. Now, some of us have lived abroad too, so we're interested in trying those things. But we still get weirded out going into like an Indian retail store, not because we're the only white people, but because we don't know what any of it is, and we get uncomfortable. So
getting it.
You got to figure out how to make your snack food, if that's what it is, a really cool new American snack food, if that makes sense. Not a Indian snack food. For example,
exactly.
When you put yourself in a cultural box like that, it causes problems because people they ask questions that you never want them to ask, right? You just want them to stick your hand in it.
Absolutely.
So, I think thinking about how you can go to market from day one in a country like the US, but have the packaging speak to a broad mainstream audience of folks, talk about flavor. Since I've lived in India before, I happen to know there's a ton of street food that actually most of the street food in India would sell really well to 90% of Americans, even the ones who shop at Walmart, because it's basically salt, fat, and carbs, right? It's totally unhealthy. It's totally unhealthy and non-nutritious, but it's really good stuff. It's interesting, it's interesting food. And some of it's healthy, but most of it's not.
Yeah.
So like the potential there is huge because we are absolutely addicted to unhealthy carbs. Yes. So if you can put it in a different spicing or a different texture, that's what makes the next great snack food. The key is to understand that you do have to spend time over here building the business on the streets, and I think it's way too easy to sit in urban India and just shipping pallets of stuff you produce there. At some point, whether it's 5 million or 10 million in US sales, you've got to get over there and set up an operation, right? And I wouldn't do that from day one unless you have some other way or reason to be in the US.
Right.
But just keep that in mind, which is that a lot of products have been imported as specialty food products, and they're still talking to their home market. The package speaks to the home market. The name speaks to, and it's like, come on, guys, you're in a foreign culture. You've got to adapt because that's how things succeed. Right?
Absolutely.
So
I think you have really made an interesting point here that, the positioning, of course, depends on what product the brand is offering, right? Of course, there can be, of course, two types of brands, right? One who wishes to only cater to the Indian diaspora, of course, if an Indian brand, and there can be brands who wish to not restrict themselves to just Indians. So there's a lot better opportunity. And both the kinds of brands exist and do well, of course. So
it's not either or, but you just have to know what you're trying to do.
Yes.
And I think the NRI population isn't, to me, it's still not big enough to really scale huge businesses. And part of it is that the NRI population, the visa holding population, they actually cook fresh food all the time at home, right? So Indian Americans who grew up here, they eat like me. I know these guys.
Yes.
But if you've got people cooking a lot, they're not actually consuming nearly as much snack food as the average American.
Right.
So, when you look at scaling the business, you generally need to get beyond that world. However, I'm not averse to people getting cash flow going in the US by using specialty retail or ethnic retail. I think that's probably smart.
Yes.
I mean, because you have to open up an importing pipe into warehouses. So you've got to get that going.
Yes. No, I think
point.
these are absolutely bang on points, really getting it. Sure. So coming down to my next question. So of course, every chooses its own path to scale, and there are of course times when they even have to walk away from the big deals as well. So based on your experience, is it a good idea? Is it a bad idea? And what is your take on that?
So they're walking away. Walking away is should be a book I write, but I think I've done it in my career. I've done it in relationships. I mean, I think saying no to otherwise really alluring and tempting things is, in a way, it's part of growing up as an adult. But I think that in business, it gets really hard to do that when you are running a food business, because food businesses, including in India, they tend not to make a lot of money initially. You have to be selling a certain volume, and it's usually quite big before you actually your profits actually pile up to something material. So during those cash flow poor years, that's when people are so tempted when they're approached by big stakeholders to overcommit way ahead of their time. So, an example would be, I'll give an example from a blinded example from a client of mine who's importing from another continent. So you don't know them. So, and they made the mistake of relying on the importer and his network of master brokers in the US. The problem is they didn't understand how importers function in the US. And importers of specialty foods are these guys don't see a lot of fast growing businesses, right? So what happens is they have general, like European importers who come to the US, these are more mature companies than I would say financially in terms of scale, that a lot of the like South Asian companies I see importing inside the US, not always, but sometimes, they come in and their approach is, I want to flood the market. I just want to get to a whole bunch of points of distribution and create some kind of stable business. And they actually, even the exporting business from Europe doesn't care if it grows very fast.
Is it?
This isn't a valid way to come into the US, right? As you come in, you have enough capital to pay your way through the distribution system and get into a couple thousand stores, and then it will grow. Usually it will grow at a low single-digit percentage almost automatically without even trying. So you'll probably be growing ahead of inflation through a classic importer specialty food model. Right? Now, you might grow faster at Indian retail just because that demand is growing faster. But my point is, my book, Ramping Your Brand, and everything that I live for is about exponential growth. So that's 75% year-over-year growth and higher. You can't generate this usually just from adding stores. It's
That's hard. A valid point. Yes.
It's very hard to do that. You're going to have to blend what I call velocity growth, which is organic growth from people buying more and more, telling their friends about it, who then buy more and more, and the word is spreading on the street, right? And so you're selling more and more out of each store that you get into year after year after year. And that's what you want to create if you want to scale a business successfully. True. And so if you come into a business, if you come into the US through that specialty food import model, their model is to basically get you out to max specialty food distribution and then throw up their hands because they have no other trick, right? So, right. So what happens is that a whole bunch of those stores, like my client I was referring to, a whole bunch of them, they're totally underperforming. In fact, most of them are underperforming because the brand has no visibility at the shelf. It wasn't put in the right position at the shelf. People are walking past it. There's been no marketing, right? There's been no event marketing on the street to get people aware that it's there. There's no sense that anything's happening. So you're relying on dumb luck that someone's going to walk by a crowded shelf and see you.
That's not really
now,
an idea.
That's a really bad idea.
Yeah.
Right now, the importer is going to say, look, your sales aren't declining though. And my response is, yeah, but there's no growth. Right? There's nothing happening here.
Yes.
So,
but the real problem is not identified here, right?
Yeah, right. But the problem with importers is they play up the first year, right? Because the first year they get you into this, there's a huge purchase order and and there's all these doors opening, and then they disappear by year two. It's all crickets and you can't find them, right? Because they don't know what to do. They don't have a plan, and they don't really control the means to get the growth to keep happening. And that happens with the consumer, which is why I wrote the book. Because if you want to grow really fast and keep scaling and growing that fast, then you have to have a really cool innovation, but you also have to learn how to get it in front of the right people at the right stores with the right positioning on the shelf. Cool. So my client, just to wrap this story up, they used the importer. They got into like 1,000 stores. Mm-hmm. In the first year, but in 600 of them, they were literally on the floor and totally invisible. In a category that probably had 40 brands on the shelf. Mm-hmm. So that's my other lesson to the US is that if you're going into retail, in the US, you actually probably have fewer brands at the Indian retail stores in any given category. Seriously, even in snack food, there's probably fewer brands on the shelf. And for every category of Indian snack food. So, and I've been in these stores, so I sort of have seen this pattern, right? So you're not going to find like in South India, they eat murukku, and there's not going to be 20 brands of that. There's not going to be 20 brands of that at an Indian retail store in the United States. But we'll have 20 brands of potato chips.
I am
salty
sure.
Snack section. So this is what I it's a really strange one.
It is.
So you have to be ready for that. And you can't be satisfied with a negotiation that says, oh, I got into this chain. No, that's just the beginning. Yes. Now you've got to figure out where in the shelf you're going to be. Am I going to be visible? And then how are you going to go and make sure that the retailer does what they say they're going to do, which is a big issue in the US.
Right.
Actually, it's probably an issue in specialty in Indian retail too. I'm sure that there's not a lot of compliance with what's promised. So this is why when brands get to a certain size, they develop a field sales arm. And that's very true in snack food. And that field sales arm is a smiling, happy T-shirt wearing group of people who basically are there to non-violently get compliance.
Very well said.
Yeah, I mean, if they were in Tamil Nadu, there'd be a lot of yelling and screaming, I think, and that would work. But I think, in the US, people are a little, they get freaked out. So you have to go in there and smile at them and get your product in the right place on the shelf, because they often just misplace everything.
True.
And sometimes you have to. So my point is, there's a lot more to negotiating for retail success in the US than getting an importer to say yes, because they don't care about growth after the first year. They don't even know what that is. Yes. Like to them, growth is 5%. it's like that doesn't interest me. Now, if you're somebody like, when Tasty Bite came to the US about 20 years ago, they were a fairly big Indian company.
Yes.
Doing ready meals. So their attitude was pretty similar. It was like, I don't really, if we do $1 million in the US, I don't really care. Because they knew it was going to grow without doing anything, but it was not fast growth.
I get that.
It was very shallow growth, and they probably didn't care initially. I mean, they later did, And they invested a lot eventually in the US market. But when they got serious, they had to set up a headquarters, they had to hire field sales staff, they had to hire a marketing team, and start to run the company like they've been running it in India.
Ultimately,
So
that's how an FMCG
yeah.
business is, developed, right? Feet on street is absolutely necessary.
Yeah, and it's no different when you're going to another country. And this is it's amazing to me that otherwise very smart people seem to forget this. They want to believe that the export is some easy money train, or
Which
like
is
this
not.
or like this client I had. Oh, well, it's a big market. We sell this much in our home country, so US population is X times our country's size, so then we'll have X. No, that's not how you calculate the market, because most of us don't care about specialty foods.
Yes.
I mean, I could go on and on about how tragic the American diet is, but it's not centered around
True.
specialty food.
So if you can give us a broad idea about how can premium growth solutions help the emerging brands, and because we have a lot of audience who are entrepreneurs and go global.
So without getting too salesy, I first tell people to go to my website, which is premiumgrowthsolutions.com. And there's a founder resources page there, which has all sorts of other pages with free resources, books to read, webinars, videos, stuff. So take advantage of that if you're just getting started. I tend to work with companies that are selling 2 to 3, actually 5 million US in sales and above. So I work with more advanced brands, not actually pure startups anymore. The one exception to that is occasionally I will work with underprivileged groups, founders from underprivileged groups in the United States who need extra assistance. And I'll work at a highly discounted rate. But I don't do a lot of that every year.
Right.
So my work is mainly with those more mature companies, but the fees are fairly big. So I'm not here to push that. I would say just read the book. There's a lot you can get from the book. If you want to go deeper than the book, I do offer a quarterly session. It's a 2-hour training session. The next one's on October 22nd.
Okay.
Unfortunately, it's at 11 a.m. Pacific time.
Okay.
It's not friendly to Delhi time.
Yeah.
But it is recorded. And if you are a qualifying founder owner, I don't care where in the world you live. So if the US market is of interest to you, this would be a good way to think about going deeper than the book, thinking about strategic planning to grow exponentially in the US. So if you have capital, you have resources that you're willing to deploy, maybe you already have a brand selling in specialty retail in the US, but you want to actually start to grow it really fast. So this is the kind of extra planning or extra training that I do every quarter.
Okay.
It's $195 US. It's not super cheap. But you'll get a free template, which I use with my clients when I do planning work with them. And it will help you think more like a professional business strategist in CPG. So that 2 hours distills a lot of wisdom in a very friendly format. There's case studies, there's data charts, all sorts of yummies. So that's one thing you could do for a limited amount of money to go a little deeper if you're just starting out.
Right. I think this would be really helpful for our viewers.
Yeah, cool.
Coming down to my next question. So, of course, if I can broadly understand, is it a good idea for brands to do pilots and taste, let's say, short successes and then strategically grow and expand? And if you can throw some light using an example.
Yeah, I think I tell people that it's really important to look at the early years after you start a food business, the first couple of years as a continued launch. Right. It's like a protracted experiment. The more you view it as an experiment, the less you'll be concerned about getting to a ridiculous amount of scale too quickly. Right. So Whether your first year is $100,000 US or $500,000, I don't really care. The point is that when you start out relatively small and in a specific regional area, and this could be in your home country as well, launching carefully in your local market and learning quickly from your fans, getting that feedback, learning how the marketing's clicking or not, learning what the sensory experience is for real people is super important, because a lot of people who are new to the food industry make mistakes without realizing it. And the biggest mistake they make is projecting their view and their sensory view of their own product onto their audience. And I think that it's really important that you spend that early time learning from your fans, getting that feedback and iterating literally the product itself. That's best done though all at a small scale.
Got it.
If you try to do this when you're 5 or 10 million and the sales are declining because you over distributed and you push too hard, that's when things financially become very terrifying, and it may not work, right? So in the US we call it pivoting. And the time to pivot is actually pretty early on. Now, a great example of this is a company you may or may not have heard of. They're called Spindrift, and they're a sparkling water brand sold in aluminum cans. I'm drinking it right now.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, Americans are really big into soft drinks, as you know, because we basically invented them. And most of them come in cans. Now, this is a brand that started in a glass bottle, and it was sold as a premium soda. So, think Pepsi, but it was just like Spindrift Pepsi, So, and it tasted great. I mean, it was yummy. He started in Boston, but it didn't move. It didn't sell well, And I think what he found was that no matter what he did, there's just no demand in America for a premium like soda, a super sweet, bubbly drink, right? If you want that in the US, you just drink Coke or Pepsi or Mountain Dew. I mean, you don't. So I talk about it in my book. Not every category is amenable to a premium priced innovation, because culturally, sometimes there's just no interest. And soda is one of them, right? Point. So he had to pivot and say, look, what about my original innovation could be moved to another category that's related to it? And so, he realized that sparkling water brands were taking off. Now, these are very low calorie. This is a very low calorie category. So sparkling water in the US, most of it has no calories at all. And that's because they put something called it's a flavor extract called natural flavors. And they'll put these chemicals in to make it taste like strawberry or peach or whatever the hell they want.
Okay.
Right. And so that's how it becomes a 0-calorie water with bubbles. So this may be, I don't know if this stuff is taking off in India because I haven't been in too long. So
yeah, it is growing here as well.
Okay, yeah, because it's a nice soda replace. If you were addicted to like Thumbs Up or something, you need to have something else. You need to get your mouth onto something else.
Yes, and of course, this is also growing in the sense that those people who are not willing to, let's say, also those people who are looking for non-alcoholic drinks, right? So it's growing in that category as well.
Okay, yeah, there you go. And that's somehow sometimes the journey, sometimes where you source volume from changes wildly from country to country, right? So that's a very different story than the US. The 0-calorie sparkling waters actually they got their volume from diet sodas in the US.
Yes.
Because the diet sodas have these creepy chemical sweeteners in them, which people started to get frightened of. And that's a very American story. It hasn't really happened all over the world. So this ended up really doing quite well, because what they did is they didn't use any chemical additives at all. They actually just used fruit juice, but they had to develop their own manufacturing process in order to get this done.
Right.
And they figured it out. It's a low carbonation soft drink. It does have some calories, but it's like 5 calories, 9 calories. And the consumer who is interested in 0 calories, to them, there's no difference.
Yeah, of course.
right? So they get to be the only low calorie soft drink that can say we don't use chemical additives. We just use real ingredients. And that in America, there's a certain group of people, and I'm one of them, who find that really appealing.
Yes.
Now they've been growing up the skate ramp in my book. They've been growing exponentially for the last 4 or 5 years. And it's been,
Wow.
It's been very much a kind of a cultish brand that, I mean, I live in Arizona. It's as hot as in Chennai down here.
Okay.
Right. So, we get up to 110 in the summer. So I drink like 5 cans a day. Right. So that's a dream situation where you can find a niche. I talk about this in my book. Find a niche that believes in your thing, and they will convert to very heavy usage.
Right.
All the time and money that's spent finding those people is it's worth it. And that also is something you need time to do in the early years. If you can figure that puzzle out, this is what I help clients with to a large extent, is finding those audiences that are really gonna, that they can spend their marketing dollars with, so that they can get a lot of heavy users really fast. Because a not very profitable business that needs to get to scale fast to become more profitable, they absolutely, from a financial perspective, need to lean on heavy users to get that to happen. Because if you think about it, in one city, and this is the thing, like in one city, you could create a $5 to $10 million business in a product category like this.
I am sure.
Just off something that really that causes people to buy cases a week.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's what you want, that's the magic you want to happen. If it's snack food, you want people who are going to be emptying the bag like practically every time they sit down.
Yeah.
Right. Or at least once a week.
Yeah.
Right.
And I mean, as you mentioned
that's a trick. That's the trick. I know, because you guys are really into healthy lifestyle. But it's the trick. It's the balance between getting heavy usage to happen without feeling like you are selling junk food to people. Right. Yes. So, but you do want heavy users, however that's defined.
Yes.
Because they make you more money per store in a very efficient manner. You don't really want to be growing by adding stores if you can, in a very large number, because every chain you add costs administrative fees, slotting fees. In the US, it's very expensive. So if the more you can grow within your existing account that you already paid to open up, the better.
Yes.
This is where things get profitable, but you got to think very cleverly about who that audience is.
Yes.
And it's not
everybody. That's the reason. Yeah. That's the reason that choosing that chain is extremely important, right? Else.
Yeah. And if, I tell people it's better if you have a list of strategic chains and you're having trouble getting onboarded, it's better to pause, to wait, than to take a crappy deal with a less ideal, of like totally non-strategic retailer, just so you can say added an account.
Yeah.
That's how sales guys think. That's not smart strategy long term.
It is not. Yeah. Awesome. So Dr. James, if I were to ask you, let's say your two maybe short-term or medium-term goals, so what would they be, either on a personal level or a professional level?
So my short-term goal is to just keep my business humming at the level it is. I've had my period of growth. I'm happy with sort of where it is to a large extent. That's my short-term goal. My longer-term goal is actually to transition into becoming a full-time author. So that'll take full-time author.
Okay.
So I'm a social scientist by background, so I wanna, and I am beginning the process of writing social science sort of fiction books for the mainstream audience. That's going to be a 10-year project. To get that going.
That really sounds
that's
interesting.
My long-term goal. Yeah, well, I'm getting older, so writing is a lot easier to do when you're old and sitting in a chair all day. So
great. So I am up for 2 more questions, and so coming down to my next question, of course. So of course you talked about building a niche here. So how can a brand really highlight its core differentiation and positioning to the end consumers? Maybe 2 or 3 points if you can highlight.
So I think that I come back to the doing your homework on your category and in whatever market you're talking about. So this is why often packaging has to change for every single market that you're in.
Sure.
Is that you need to understand what is the key, I call it the key attribute, is some kind of symbol that you can place on the front of your package. It's usually just one. That could be a certification seal. It could be a nutritional call out. It could be a claim. It could be a flavor message, right? Depending on what makes you particularly interesting and novel in your category, but not just novel, but novel in a way that connects to what I call a powerful outcome, right? So say you have a low calorie load in your category, like say you have like 20% of the calories per serving than other brands have on the shelf. That speaks to someone like me very quickly as sort of a weight management sort of signal that you could send on your package, right? Now, you're not going to say something bad like diet snack food or something horrible. What you're going to do is maybe just highlight the calories per serving in a big circle on the front of your package and let the consumer then infer, oh, wow, oh, man, that's low. They will then in their own brain, this is the beauty. If you pick the right symbol, they will automatically connect it to what I call a high value outcome. And then suddenly this becomes interesting to try. Now, if you can get them to try it on the basis of that signaling process, you've done better than a lot of specialty food brands, which if you've looked at them, they tend to throw tons of symbols all over the front panel. It's like there's like 20 things there. And I can tell you that the shopper going by
is confused.
They don't know what to focus on. But B, and here's the real risk, they may focus on something that's not very important strategically. My favorite punching bag is like gluten-free. People will always put gluten, if their product's gluten-free, they'll always put it on the front part. And it's like,
and the real consumer is not looking for that, right?
Yeah, in the category, it may not even be important, but the reality is your high value consumer may not care at all about that. And so what if you're randomly getting purchases from a whole bunch of people who are into gluten-free? That means that at any moment, they may just abandon you for some other gluten-free treat. And you don't know when that's going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, that can even happen this year or maybe even after 5 years. We never know.
Yeah. You're not focused. If you're not focused on gluten-free as your strategy.
That's a great point.
And you put it on your front panel and make it super easy. You may be attracting a whole bunch of like worthless consumers is what I call them. So the beauty is that people in the US who buy the kinds of foods we're discussing here, they flip over the back and the front, they do look at the packages more than the average person. So if someone you want to attract them on the basis that you want to attract them strategically, right? So hook them with what you want to hook with. Yes. If they have a gluten issue, they're going to turn it over and check.
Yes.
Like make them do the work.
That's an interesting point.
And then it subordinates that need to the strategic need that you're trying to fulfill, which is in this case, a low calorie snack in a high calorie snack category. I'm just making something up. So it's really about that key symbol. And then what is that high value outcome that you can attract? And a high value outcome is something that's already mainstream in the society.
Yes.
So I know because India is very complex and there's so many different groups, right? So it's very easy in India to find yourself talking to a tiny little group of people, right? So you got to make sure that if you want to scale this thing, you're talking about an outcome that matters to, hundreds of millions of people.
Of course.
So that's going to be a very, what I call a grandma basic. Yes. It's not going to be some weird niche thing, right? Save that for the yoga classes. That makes sense. Yeah. So like I noticed on your website, so diabetes management, that has a massive audience in urban India, right? Not everything else does. right? In America, we have lots of health foods marketing, all sorts of crazy outcomes, and a lot of them don't have much of a big audience.
True.
And so yeah, be very focused on the front of your package. What's the symbolism you have, and what's it trying to say? That's why you need to spend the first couple of years interacting with your fans, because what you'll find is that you'll get a whole bunch of different opinions about your product, and it may seem chaotic, right? But that's actually good raw material. What then you can do is sort of think through that as a business person and say, I want those fans, and here's why. And then you can redo the package and your marketing to zero in on them. And what you've done is you've let the market be your laboratory to teach you where the money really is, right? Rather than just assuming that your motive as the founder is the consumer's motive. Not always.
Great point. Awesome. So coming down to my last question for this session. So, I mean, what is your take on the rapidly growing plant-based snacking market? And of course, how do retailers perceive it? And of course, the end consumer also. Maybe if you can throw some light on that.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a curmudgeon, as they say, on plant-based snacks. And that's because, unfortunately, I've looked at the data for over 20 years. I've been tracking this sector. And just to clarify what I'm talking about, I'm talking about from an American cultural perspective, these would be snacks made from lentils, water lilies, seeds, things like that are nutrient dense. They have more nutrition, or what Americans think is high value nutrition, than a potato chip.
True.
Right. So our number one, most of the snacks that Americans eat come from corn or potatoes.
Right.
Like 90%.
I'm
Seriously.
Sure. Yeah.
So you have to understand that you're competing for that 10% of market share. And historically, very few of those brands have scaled very significantly. Now, that said, a number of them have been able to get to 10 or 20 million in US dollars. So that's a success of its own, but it's not changing much, and it's not creating a lot of scale. So the problem that I found is that Americans, it's a lot like soda. We're obsessed with our iconic snack brands in the US and those categories. So we really do want popcorn, potato chips, and tortilla chips. That's basically all we want, and maybe pretzels.
Right.
And that is, that's unfortunately, even for me, that's enough, right? So when you're trying to introduce a new snack form, you really have to have, I think, conservative expectations about how big you'll ever get. But it's not to dissuade people from trying to go in and create an 8, 10 or $20 million business. That's already happened many times.
Yes.
The reason, though, that the plant-based snacking sector hasn't taken off, ironically, is because I know most of the companies in this space, and they just aren't managed properly.
Probably.
So I used to do consulting for Frito-Lay. Not that I made them a lot of money, but but I learned a lot about their business and how they do business. And that was an eye opener for me. And all I can say is that I have yet to see a single plant-based snack food company put in the kind of street game, the ground game, that Frito-Lay does every day of the week. Right. And so I have told that to clients in this space. I'm like, hey, I know you've raised a lot of money. Your product is well developed, but do you understand what it's going to take in the US? And are you willing to do that street game? And I haven't met anybody who is. And I think I can't rule out the possibility, therefore, of scaling something like some kind of funky snack based on an alternative seed or grain. But I think it's going to have to be done very cleverly.
Right.
I think Buja is one of the ones who's starting to do it right, but the pandemic interrupted a lot of their efforts on the street here because we mismanaged it so poorly.
Of course, pandemic was a big blow. Of course.
So, the case study history is bad. I just want to be honest. And what that means is that taking on Frito-Lay in the US is going to require more of an investment in resources in terms of humans on the ground than probably many other categories. And that's a big commitment. And so you have to ask yourself, do you really want to, are you ready to go there? And if you are, you got to come to the US, you got to set up an operation here, and it's going to be a struggle, right? But I can't say it's impossible. I haven't seen anyone they haven't committed the way that brands like Kind Bar committed to growth, right? Or, Vitamin Water or Red Bull, which is more of a global brand. But when Red Bull was growing internationally, it would enter countries with a very aggressive street game. Because it works, but it's a big risk.
It is.
Look, in the 90s when Red Bull showed up, they were laughed at by the soda companies. They didn't take it seriously. That was a big mistake.
Yes.
Because it did a lot of damage to them. The number one reason to drink soda in the US has always been caffeine.
Yes.
So, coffee was on a growth phase because of Starbucks. So the volume didn't come from coffee, it came from soda.
Yeah.
So, they got hurt. And I think, so crazy things have been done here and in other countries, but man, you have to put in the time. And it's what I call, if you take my Riding the Ramp webinar on October 22nd, what I call it is like a holistic 4P strategy approach, right? You got to be pulling every one of the 4 Ps. You can't just ship a product and hire a sales guy. It's a lot more than that. So,
and as you rightly mentioned, that level of commitment is really required to make it big. And it's not only that 10% which for the market share which a brand should fight for, but of course there is a larger opportunity.
No, I think that the long-term trends are there. I think that I actually think Indian snacks, specifically from the street, have enormous potential. Now, not all of them are that healthy. They probably have the most potential. Bhuja, if you look it up, it's basically just, it's a real thing. It's a real thing in India. It just happens to be what Americans would call trail mix.
Yeah.
So that to us doesn't seem that healthy because it's got some peanuts in it, but other than that, but it's the kind of thing Americans would have watching sports on TV, not cricket, but our versions of it, watching sports and drinking beer.
Right.
That's a great position. By the way, that's a great position because people empty bags. Like the bag just disappears. So,
of course.
Which is what you want.
Right. Awesome. So it was really lovely having you on this session. I really enjoyed our conversation. On a closing remark, Dr. James, if you can quickly mention about your book, Ramping Your Brand, and of course, it is a bestseller on Amazon. So you can get it there. And if you can give a quick summary and we can wrap it up.
Yeah, Ramping Your Brand is, it was my attempt to teach the lessons of some of very famous American brands like Kind Bar and Skinny Pop and Vita Coco Coconut Water, and Chobani Yogurt, which really shook up the food industry here and the global food industry by revealing to people that you can scale pretty quickly premium priced brands that are offering something compelling, modern, and new in the category. And it's essentially it teaches you a mental model on how to build an exponential growth business based on starting at a premium price with a premium sort of design and positioning. And I coach you how to do that, how to think it through. There's lots of data to back up what I say coming from the US, and you'll learn a lot about US retail as well if you read the book. So I highly encourage people to read that if you want to come to the North American market, especially whether it's online or retail.
Awesome. Great. So of course, happy to have that link as well. And
great. Yeah.
Love to read that.
Awesome.
Awesome. So
Thanks for having me.
so much once again for your time. Really appreciate that.
Likewise, thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it. It's been fun.
Right. You have a great day ahead and
Okay. You too. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
and